All right, welcome back for another deep dive. And this time we're going to get into something I know a lot of independent musicians, really kind of struggle with. It's paid media. And you've sent in a bunch of articles really wanting to kind of get to the bottom of like, is it really worth it? And if so, how do we do it right? And, without feeling like we're selling out.
It's a real crossroads, I think, for artists today. You're absolutely right. I mean, the music industry is just so crowded more than ever. One article I saw called it a content tsunami, literally thousands of songs uploaded every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, how do you get heard above all that noise, especially when it feels like, nobody's sitting around waiting for your next single to drop?
Yeah, like that whole shouting into the void feeling, it's so real. And I think every artist has felt that way at some point, for sure.
Right.
So I think for this deep dive, we're going to really try to, cut through some of that hype, separate fact from fiction, and hopefully, give you some takeaways, stuff you can really actually use.
That's the goal. And the first thing we should probably do, just to get on the same page, is to define what we even mean by paid media. Because I think that term can feel kind of vague and, maybe even a little bit shady to some.
Right. Like, is it just buying fake streams? Where's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
line?
Yeah. So based on all these articles we've been looking at, it seems like paid media, for musicians anyway, really means any promotional activity that you're, actually putting money behind to get your music out there in front of more people. So think social media ads, those sponsored features you see on blogs, even some of those playlist placements. It's all about that, amplifying your work, not faking it, not fabricating success. And here's the thing that might surprise you. Even the big labels use this stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's not just some like indie workaround. This is standard practice.
Pretty much. I mean, everyone's doing it. And that actually leads right into one of the big, myths that we see in a lot of these articles, which is this idea that using paid media makes you look inauthentic or like you're not, good enough to make it on your own.
Yeah, I think I've definitely felt that. Like, is it cheating somehow? But if everyone's doing it, from indie artists, Beyonce, I mean, it's clearly more about, strategizing, right? Like playing the game.
100%. It's like, think about it this way. Established artists, they already have a huge advantage, right? They've got that built-in fan base, the label connections. Their name is already popping up on playlists. So paid media helps level the playing field a little bit at least. Lets you get your music in those same spaces where potential fans are already hanging out.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how it can even things out a little bit. But is it all about like racking up more streams or is there more to it than that?
No, there's definitely more. A lot of these articles talk about how you can actually, boost your credibility too. You think about it. If someone sees your song featured on a blog that they trust, it's almost like, it's like a stamp of approval. Makes them take you more seriously.
Yeah, totally. It's like, okay, well, somebody else thinks this is good. Maybe I should check it out.
Right. And that can have a ripple effect. So that initial credibility can catch the eye of playlist curators, music writers, maybe even potential collaborators. It's all about getting your name and your music out there in a way that feels, legit, not spammy.
Okay, so we're not talking about like, buying your way onto the Billboard charts, but more about like strategically getting in front of the right eyeballs, right? And that's where I think this whole targeting thing comes in.
Yes, targeting is key. And a lot of these articles emphasize that over and over again. It's all about putting your music in front of the people who are actually most likely to, dig it. Think of it like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't put up flyers for your metal band at a classical music festival.
Right.
So targeting lets you do the same thing online.
Oh, I get the analogy. So instead of just blasting it out to everybody, I can get really specific about like who I want to reach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Most of these platforms these days, they give you so much control. You can target by age, location, interests. You can even target people based on other bands they like. It's kind of wild.
Wow, it's like having like a virtual street team almost that can find those like needle in a haystack fans all over the world.
It really is. So yeah, it's about that initial boost. But then there's this whole other piece that's fascinating, and that's the idea of an organic boost. Like, how does paid media actually help with that?
Yeah, that has me intrigued too. I mean, I get the paid part, but how does that translate into like organic growth? It seems like those are almost opposites.
Right. And that's where it gets really interesting because paid media isn't just about those initial streams or follows you get from the ad itself. It's about using that initial bump to kind of kickstart that natural organic growth.
Okay, so like a snowball effect.
Exactly. Like those early interactions from paid promotion, they're like a signal boost,
Yeah.
right? The algorithm sees people engaging with your music. Playlists are more likely to notice you. And then suddenly you're more likely to pop up in those suggested artists or fans also like sections.
So it's not just about the initial push, but it's about using that to then get on the radar of like the algorithms and the tastemakers who can actually like keep that growth going.
Yeah, you nailed it. It's like you're using the paid stuff to give yourself that initial momentum, and then that can hopefully lead to, much bigger, broader organic reach over time.
All right, so we're starting to see how paid media can actually be like a really powerful tool for independent artists, but I think it's also time to address the the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
the fear of failure. I think that holds a lot of us back from even like trying something new.
Oh, for sure. I mean, investing in anything for your music career can feel, it can feel risky, especially when you're just starting out. What if I put all this money into it and nothing happens? It's a valid worry.
Totally. And that these articles, they don't really sugarcoat that, but they do offer this like interesting perspective on failure. Like they really encourage us to like reframe it as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, that's such a crucial mindset shift. Like instead of thinking, what if this doesn't work?
Yeah.
Think, what can I learn from this no matter what happens?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So even if like a campaign doesn't get me 1 million streams overnight, I can still gain some like valuable insights, right? Like about what resonates with my audience, what platforms work best, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's why starting small, like with a small experimental budget,
Yeah.
is so important. You don't have to go all in right away. Just, dip your toes in the water, see what happens, and then, use that data to inform your next move.
It's like almost like running a science experiment, right? Like you have a hypothesis, you test it out, you analyze the results, and then you adjust based on what you learn. And, no scientist expects every experiment to be a groundbreaking success, right, on the first try.
I love that analogy. And it highlights how crucial it is to just be adaptable, right? Like what works for one artist might totally flop for another, and what works on one platform, it might be a dud somewhere else. So it's all about finding what works best for you.
Yeah, so we've got to be willing to experiment, track our results, and not be afraid to tweak our approach along the way.
Okay, that makes sense. But now I'm sure our listeners probably like, okay, but how? Like, let's get into some specifics. These articles mention Instagram ads, TikTok ads, Spotify, even working with blogs. Like, where do we even begin with choosing the right platform?
Okay, yeah, let's break it down. And it all comes back to understanding your audience and your goals, right? Like we talked about that before. So Instagram and TikTok, I mean, those are the giants these days, right? And their ads can reach a huge audience, especially for making music that's like, visually driven.
Yeah. So if I'm like all about those eye-catching music videos, those are probably good places to start.
It could be, but there's a catch. You've got to really, really stand out on those platforms. Think about it. People are scrolling through their feeds like at lightning speed, bombarded with content. So your ad has to be super engaging, really visually compelling, and it's got to grab their attention in like the first few seconds. No pressure, right?
Exactly. So you've got to be prepared to create like really top-notch video content that's tailored to those platforms. Think short, catchy, something that'll stop those thumbs mid-scroll.
Okay, got it. So Instagram and TikTok, great for reach, but you've got to be ready to play that attention game. What about Spotify? I mean, it seems like a no-brainer if you're trying to reach, people who love music.
Oh, yeah, for sure. What's great about Spotify is that people are already in that music discovery mindset,
Yeah.
They're there, they're ready to hear new stuff. And plus, Spotify's targeting options are like ridiculously detailed. So you can target people based on their listening habits, like what genres they're into, what playlists they follow, even specific artists they love.
Wait, so if my like dream collab is with like, I don't know, Billie Eilish, I can actually target ads to people who already listen to her.
You got it. So it's like you're putting your music right in the ears of the people who are like statistically more likely to be into your sound.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful stuff.
That's wild. But if everybody's like listening passively, doesn't that mean my ad has to work even harder to like cut through?
It does. I mean, you only have a few seconds to make an impression, so you need a catchy hook, some sonic element that makes them go, wait, what is this? It's about sparking that curiosity and making them want to hear more.
Okay, so high impact sound is key for Spotify. Makes sense. Now, these articles also mention like collaborating with music blogs. That feels like a whole different approach.
It is, and it can be super effective, especially for building that, credibility we were talking about. Like, if you can get featured on a blog that's known for its taste and it aligns with your genre, it's almost like getting a cosign from someone in the know.
Totally. It's like, hey, this blog I trust thinks this artist is cool. Maybe I should too. But how do you even like get on their radar? I imagine they get bombarded with submissions.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's super competitive. But that's why strategy is so important. So research blogs carefully, make sure your music is a good fit, and then craft like a personalized pitch. Don't just send a generic email with a link to your song. Like, make them care.
Right, like actually make it clear why you're reaching out to them specifically.
Exactly. And be prepared to pay for, like, a sponsored feature. Most blogs offer this as an option, and it pretty much guarantees placement and helps support their work, too.
So it's like a paid ad, but it feels more like organic and editorial, which could be really appealing to listeners.
Exactly. It's a way to tap into that blog's, like, existing audience and borrow some of that credibility.
Okay, so we've got like Instagram and TikTok for reach. We've got Spotify for like those targeted music lovers. And then we've got blogs for like that tastemaker boost. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach, it seems.
Nope.
Hmm.
And the beauty of it is you don't have to choose just one, You can experiment, you can play around, see what works best for you, for your music, for your budget. And you can even combine different approaches.
So like maybe I try some Spotify ads to like build up my listener base. And then I use Instagram ads to promote like my next show in those same cities.
Exactly. It's all about getting creative and strategic. And remember, this is all an ongoing process, So track your results, be willing to tweak things, and don't get discouraged if something doesn't work out exactly as you planned.
Yeah, embrace the experiment, analyze the data, and just like keep refining the approach. I like it.
Yeah. And perhaps most importantly, just remember, paid media, it's just one tool,
Yeah.
It's one piece of the puzzle. It should complement your other efforts, like making great music, connecting with fans, playing shows. It's not a shortcut. It's like an amplifier.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Okay, so we've talked a lot of theory, but now I'm kind of dying to hear about how some of this actually plays out in real life. I was reading about this producer who almost gave up on paid ads altogether, but then they had like this major turnaround. I'm so curious to hear like how they did it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the theory and, strategies and even how to kind of handle that. What if it doesn't work? Fear. But I'm excited to like actually get into some real world examples, like some stories about how independent artists have actually used this stuff effectively, just to show us how it like plays out in the wild.
Yeah, I think this is the really fun part because it is inspirational. I mean, there are people out there who've used paid media to reach new fans, get noticed by the right people and really build the careers they were, dreaming of.
All right, I'm ready for some success stories. Let's hear it.
Okay, so this first one's a great example of, choosing the right platform and understanding your audience, which, like we talked about earlier, I came across this case study about an indie pop artist who was like, doing all the quote unquote right things, posting regularly, releasing their music, but just not really breaking through to that wider audience.
Yeah, that shouting into the void feeling all over again.
Right. But they were smart. They took a step back and realized that like a lot of their existing fans were really into like gaming and anime culture, which is kind of interesting.
Okay, so they had this like very specific niche audience, not just general, pop music fans.
Exactly. And so instead of trying to like appeal to everybody, they decided to just lean into that. So they started incorporating more, gaming and anime references into their music and their visuals. And most importantly, they shifted their paid media focus to platforms where those communities were already hanging out.
That's a really smart move. So which platforms did they end up going for?
Twitch and Discord, which, huge for gamers, obviously. So they started running like targeted ads on Twitch, promoting their music during live streams of popular games that like fit their sound. And then on Discord, they like actually joined servers that were dedicated to anime and gaming. And they were really smart about it. Like they weren't just in there like spamming their music. They were genuinely engaging with the community and sharing their music in a way that felt like, natural and organic.
Ah, that's so cool. So it wasn't just like, hey, I'm an artist, listen to my stuff. It was more about like actually finding that common ground and connecting with them on their own turf.
Yeah, exactly. And it worked. I mean, they saw a huge increase in their streams, their followers, and they even started getting shout outs from some like popular gamers and influencers in those spaces.
Oh, wow. That's like That's that organic boost that we were talking about, like in action.
It really is.
Yes.
And it all stemmed from that initial decision to like really understand who their target audience was
Yeah.
and put their music where those people were already spending their time.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Totally. Or what about a story that shows how paid media can help artists get noticed by like the industry people, like bloggers, labels, that whole side of things.
Okay, I've got a great one for that. I was reading about this folk rock band, and they were doing pretty well locally, but they were like really struggling to break out beyond their hometown scene. They were playing shows, releasing their music, but not really getting on the radar of like, the people who could help them reach that larger audience.
So they were hitting a ceiling, even though they had the talent and they were putting in the work.
Yeah, exactly. They needed to get in front of those tastemakers, the people who could give them that extra push. So they decided to invest in a paid media campaign that was focused on like, sponsored blog features and playlist placements.
Interesting. So not just reaching fans directly, but actually using paid media to try to get the attention of those like industry gatekeepers.
Exactly. So they were very strategic. They did a lot of research and found like, music blogs that aligned with their sound that had a good reputation in the industry, blogs that people actually paid attention to. And then they reached out to those blogs and paid for those sponsored features. And they made sure to like highlight their new album, their upcoming tour dates, all that good stuff.
So they were kind of strategically positioning themselves alongside other artists that like those blogs were already covering, almost like, borrowing some of that credibility.
Exactly. And they also invested in like getting their music on some popular Spotify playlists that were curated by those same blogs.
Oh, that's so smart. Because, yeah, if I'm listening to a playlist and I discover this new band that I love, there's already like that implied trust. It's like, well, if this blog put them on this playlist, they must be good.
Exactly. It's that credibility boost. Again. And it worked. So, yeah, they got more streams. They got more followers from those blog features and playlist placements. But here's the really cool part. They started getting emails from music journalists, radio promoters, even a couple of A&R reps from labels who had discovered their music through those channels.
Whoa, that's amazing. So that initial investment in paid media like actually led to real industry connections and opportunities. That's huge.
It did. And I think it just shows how paid media can be used strategically, not just to reach fans, but to like really open doors that might have been closed otherwise.
Yeah, it's like they created that snowball effect, right? Like the initial push led to more visibility, which led to more organic opportunities and hopefully, a much bigger career.
Exactly. All right, I've got one last example to kind of round things out. And this one really illustrates the importance of like budgeting, tracking your results, and being willing to adjust your approach, like all that experimental mindset stuff we talked about. So I read about this electronic music producer who was super excited about like using social media ads to promote their new EP.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a common starting point for a lot of artists. It seems very like, accessible and straightforward.
Yeah, for sure. But it's also easy to waste money if you're not careful, if you're not strategic about it. And so this producer, they initially just like threw a bunch of money at a Facebook ad campaign without really thinking about like who they were targeting or like, what their ad even looked like.
Oh, no. So just kind of like hoping for the best, but not really putting in that like strategic groundwork.
Right. And unfortunately, it flopped. Like they weren't getting much engagement, not many clicks, and they were like starting to feel pretty discouraged, honestly.
I bet. It's got to be so disheartening when you like put money into something and it just doesn't seem to be working.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But this producer didn't give up, which is the important part. Instead of thinking like paid ads don't work, they're like, okay, what am I doing wrong? And they realized that they hadn't really stopped to think about like who their ideal listener even was.
Oh, sure.
Or made an ad that would like actually appeal to that person.
Right. So they were just like throwing their music out into the void, not really like targeting it effectively.
Right. And that was their big takeaway. Like paid media requires a strategic approach. So they did their research, they figured out who they were trying to reach, and then they made a brand new ad that was way more visually appealing and like, relevant to those people's interests.
So they put more thought into like that virtual flyer, basically.
Exactly. And they also started experimenting with like different ad placements and targeting options to see, what performed best.
So they embraced that experimental mindset, like analyzing the data and tweaking things along the way.
Yeah, they did. And it made all the difference. Like their new campaign was so much more successful. They got more streams, more follows, just more engagement overall.
Oh, that's so great. It's such a good example of how, like, turning a failure into a learning experience can actually lead to, way better results.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show, paid media isn't a set it and forget it thing. It's about actively engaging, analyzing, and adjusting based on what that data tells you.
It's a process, It's learning and refining as you go. And I think that's like a key takeaway from all these stories, right? Like paid media can be incredibly powerful, but it's not like some magic solution.
Definitely not. It takes work, it takes strategy, and it takes that willingness to experiment and adapt.
But as we've heard, when it's done right, it can be a total game changer,
Yeah.
especially for independent artists who are really trying to reach a wider audience and, build those sustainable careers.
Totally agree. I think that's a great point to end on. We've covered so much in this deep dive, but hopefully, our listener is leaving feeling more informed, more confident, and, maybe even a little bit inspired to like give it a shot themselves.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think the key takeaway, the thing to really remember is that like there's no one size fits all approach.
Yeah.
It's really about finding what works best for you and your music and your goals.
Yeah. So go out there, experiment, learn, and most importantly, keep making incredible music.
And hey, maybe one day we'll be featuring your story as like a shining example of how paid media can help independent artists achieve their dreams.
That would be awesome. All right. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time.
Keep creating and keep connecting.